Imagine living in a world where your neighbors, your family, or even your friends could turn on you without warning, accusing you of dark, supernatural powers. In parts of Africa, this nightmare was a reality in the early 2000s. Witch hunts, some of the most brutal and horrifying episodes in modern history, swept through rural villages, turning once safe communities into sites of terror. In these witch hunts, people, often elderly women, children, and vulnerable individuals, were accused of using dark magic to cause misfortune, illness, or even death. The accusations were frequently rooted in fear, superstition, and the overwhelming belief in witchcraft, a belief that is deeply woven into the social fabric of many African societies. But how did these witch hunts gain such momentum in the 21st century? Why, in a world where technology and modernity were on the rise, did a fear rooted in ancient traditions and beliefs still have the power to destroy lives? In this video, we'll take you through the shocking events that occurred in Africa during the 2000s, a time when superstition and fear took hold of entire communities. From the rise of witch hunts in countries like Tanzania, Nigeria, and Ghana, to the devastating impact these hunts had on countless innocent lives, we'll explore the underlying causes, the political and social factors that fueled the hysteria, and the heartbreaking consequences for the victims. Stay with us as we uncover a chapter of history that you may not have known existed, and the lives that were lost in the name of fear. In Tanzania, witch hunts became a widespread phenomenon, particularly in the rural areas where old superstitions still held immense power. The belief in witches was tied to the fear of death, disease, and even the misfortunes that befell entire villages. Among the most common targets of these accusations were elderly women, many of whom were living in poverty and isolation. The idea was that these women, often considered vulnerable or feeble, were believed to wield supernatural powers that could harm others. A particularly tragic episode of witch hunting occurred in the early 2000s, when accusations of witchcraft became almost routine in parts of northern Tanzania. This was amplified by the media, which sensationalized reports of supposed witchcraft-related deaths and illnesses. Fear spread quickly in these tight-knit communities, and in the absence of formal judicial systems, many people took justice into their own hands. Villagers would often accuse elderly women of witchcraft without any evidence other than suspicion or personal grudges, subjecting them to violent assaults, ostracism, and even murder. In one of the more gruesome instances, women accused of witchcraft were often killed in brutal rituals, which could include being hacked to death with machetes or burned alive. Thousands of women fell victim to these tragic practices, and the horror of these witch hunts cast a dark shadow over rural Tanzania for years. Local government officials in many cases were either too afraid or too corrupt to intervene, further exacerbating the crisis. In Nigeria, witch hunts were similarly widespread during the 2000s, particularly in the oil-rich Niger Delta region, where competition for resources often led to deep social divides. Witchcraft accusations became a method of resolving personal disputes or gaining power over enemies. In these regions, accusations were often targeted at children, many of whom were blamed for illness or tragedy in the family. This phenomenon was particularly alarming because children, sometimes as young as 5 or 6, were branded as witches and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. One of the most infamous cases occurred in the early 2000s when a group of children in the southern Nigerian city of Calabar were accused of witchcraft. The accusations were fueled by local pastors who claimed that the children were responsible for a series of mysterious deaths in the area. These children were subjected to horrifying exorcisms that involved beatings, starvation, and even physical torture. They were often abandoned by their families and left to fend for themselves in an unforgiving world. Unfortunately, this kind of witchcraft-related abuse was not isolated to one region, but affected communities throughout Nigeria. Religious leaders, particularly from evangelical Christian movements, played a significant role in fueling these witch hunts. With the spread of Pentecostal Christianity, which emphasized spiritual warfare against evil forces, witchcraft accusations became more prevalent. In some cases, children accused of witchcraft were taken to pastors for deliverance or healing. only to be physically and emotionally scarred. Ghana, a country with deep-rooted cultural beliefs in witchcraft, also saw a rise in witch hunts during the 2000s, particularly in the northern regions of the country, where local traditional beliefs were intertwined with Christian teachings. Witchcraft accusations were used as a scapegoat for societal problems. These accusations were often linked to political instability, economic struggles, and social strife. In these contexts, individuals, usually women or the elderly, were blamed for causing misfortune through witchcraft. One of the most disturbing cases was the rise of witch camps in northern Ghana. These camps were often located in remote villages, where those accused of witchcraft were sent to live out their days in exile. While some women accused of witchcraft were banished from their homes and left to die alone in these camps, others were brutally beaten, burned, or killed. These women were considered outcasts, often forced to wear chains or endure public humiliation. Local authorities and religious groups in Ghana were also slow to act. While some political leaders condemned the witch hunts, the deeply entrenched belief in witchcraft remained hard to break. The political unrest in the country only fueled this fear, and witch hunts became a tool for gaining control over rival communities. During this time, the government, along with various NGOs, worked tirelessly to raise awareness and educate the population about the dangers of witchcraft accusations. Despite these efforts, witch hunts still persisted into the 2000s, leaving behind a legacy of fear and trauma for countless individuals. Religion played a significant role in shaping the witch hunts that occurred in Africa during the 2000s. While many African societies have long held beliefs in witchcraft, the spread of Christianity, particularly Pentecostal Christianity, added a new dimension to the fear of witchcraft. In some cases, Christian leaders fueled the hysteria by equating misfortunes like illness or economic hardship with witchcraft. This belief system linked the supernatural to everyday life, painting witchcraft not just as a cultural practice, but as a direct threat to one's spiritual salvation. Evangelical preachers, especially those preaching spiritual warfare, were often at the forefront of these witch hunts. They used their platforms to preach that witches and evil spirits were responsible for all manner of suffering, from poverty to disease. The association of witchcraft with moral failure created a dangerous environment in which any misfortune could be blamed on witchcraft. This led to a more intense witch-hunting culture, where anyone, even children or elderly women, could be accused based on nothing more than suspicion. At the same time, the deep-rooted traditional spiritual beliefs in many African societies were intertwined with Christianity, creating a potent mixture that intensified the fear of witchcraft. In rural villages, people believed that witches had the power to harm others, whether by casting spells to cause illness or misfortune, or by even causing death. This supernatural belief system became an entrenched part of daily life, leaving many communities vulnerable to manipulation. Traditional healers, or witch doctors, often played a complex role in perpetuating these fears. While some sought to protect their communities by diagnosing and curing ailments, others fueled the belief in the power of witches, sometimes for their own gain. In this charged atmosphere, accusations of witchcraft became a tool for resolving conflicts, targeting those who were seen as socially weak or marginalized, such as the elderly, disabled, or women who stood out as other. Superstition and fear were not confined to rural areas alone. In urban settings, where people moved from villages into cities in search of work, they carried with them their traditional beliefs and fears. These beliefs didn't always fade with modernization, rather they evolved. The struggle between modernity and tradition became evident when urban dwellers faced unexpected misfortunes. Accusations of witchcraft would often explode in these settings, with individuals accused of witchcraft being ostracized or even exiled from their communities. In these cases, the influence of Christianity was particularly potent. Pastors who preached about the dangers of witchcraft and the need to purge society of its evil were often the first to label individuals as witches. This belief in witchcraft as a form of moral contamination, something that could destroy families and communities, perpetuated a cycle of accusation and violence. In many African societies, these beliefs were also used to explain societal problems, such as the spread of HIV/AIDS, poverty, or political instability. Instead of addressing the systemic issues or providing medical solutions, the easy explanation became witchcraft. This shift in focus allowed the more fundamental problems to remain unaddressed, while the witch hunts distracted from the true causes of suffering. Religious leaders, some of whom were corrupt or opportunistic, saw this as a chance to consolidate power, control communities, and manipulate fears for personal gain. Tragically, the victims of these witch hunts, often children, elderly women, or those on the fringes of society, were the ones who paid the highest price for these superstitions. As the witch hunts escalated in the 2000s, the link between religion and superstition became clearer. Witchcraft accusations, once rooted in local traditions, were now intertwined with global religious movements, amplifying the hysteria. These intertwined systems of belief created a perfect storm for the persecution of innocent people, often with devastating results. Fear of the supernatural, combined with religious teachings that emphasized the power of witches, left many vulnerable to false accusations. In this environment, it wasn't just belief in witchcraft that was dangerous, it was the willingness of society to accept the accusations as truth, without question. The impact of witch hunts on individuals accused of witchcraft was devastating. For those accused, the consequences were immediate and often fatal. Many victims, particularly elderly women and children, were subjected to violent beatings or even killed by the very people they had once called family or neighbors. In some rural areas, accusations of witchcraft were enough to incite mob justice, with the accused often facing public executions or being burned alive. In addition to physical violence, victims were often ostracized and exiled from their communities. Women accused of witchcraft were especially vulnerable. They were frequently blamed for any misfortunes that befell their families, such as illness, death, or crop failure. As a result, many elderly women found themselves abandoned, forced to live in isolation, away from their homes and loved ones. This isolation led to a life of suffering, as these women were deprived of basic needs like food, shelter, and medical care. Communities, too, were deeply affected by these witch hunts. Trust was shattered, and fear of being falsely accused of witchcraft permeated daily life. Families were torn apart by suspicion, as accusations of witchcraft often became a way to settle personal grudges or gain power over rivals. This climate of fear prevented communities from thriving, as people became more focused on self-preservation than on working together for the common good. In many cases, the social fabric of entire villages was destroyed. Neighbors who had once been friends now turned on each other, with long-standing relationships ruptured by unfounded accusations. This was especially true in regions where witchcraft accusations were linked to political instability. Local leaders, unable or unwilling to intervene, often fueled the violence by either ignoring the issue or even encouraging it to consolidate their power. The emotional toll on those accused, as well as on their families, was profound. Many victims were subjected to intense psychological trauma. The constant fear of being accused and the stigma that followed often led to mental health issues, such as depression and anxiety. For children especially, the psychological scars were long-lasting, with some growing up in foster homes or orphanages after being abandoned by their families. The witch hunts in Africa during the 2000s stand as a tragic testament to how superstition, fear, and social instability can devastate entire communities. From the senseless killings in Tanzania to the brutal exorcisms in Nigeria, these witch hunts revealed the dangerous consequences of unchecked beliefs. What's most heartbreaking is that many of the accused were innocent people, often elderly women and children, who became victims of a societal panic that sought to explain every misfortune through the lens of witchcraft. While the witch hunts of the 2000s may have subsided in some regions, the underlying issues that fueled them remain deeply embedded in certain parts of Africa. The blend of traditional spiritual beliefs with modern religious teachings has created a volatile environment where accusations of witchcraft continue to surface. This highlights the ongoing need for education, legal protections, and a greater understanding of how superstitions can be manipulated for power. As we reflect on this dark chapter of African history, it's crucial that we continue to raise awareness about the dangers of superstition and work towards a future where fear and ignorance no longer lead to violence and tragedy. If we don't learn from the past, we risk repeating it, leaving more innocent lives destroyed by baseless accusations. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of global issues. Together, we can continue to shed light on the untold stories that need to be heard.